How many Cinewhoops is enough for one man? The original Shendrones Squirt as realized by Rotor Riot? The Holybro Kopis Cinewhoop? The iFlight Bumblebee? The Diatone Taycan? How many Cinewhoops is too much for one man? I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. In case that intro didn't tip you off, it is Cinewhoop week on my channel. We're going to go through all these different ready-to-fly / bind-and-fly Cinewhoops and figure out, well, I mean, the ultimate goal is to figure out which one's best, which one should you buy. This is the Shendrones Squirt frame, and Andy Shen certainly has to get credit as probably the inventor of the Cinewhoop. Andy Shen is an incredibly innovative frame designer based out of New York City, and honestly, I feel like he hasn't gotten some of the commercial success and realization he deserves. He has come up with so many innovative ideas, some of which have percolated out and been made popular by others. In this case, the Shendrones Squirt has to be acknowledged as the original of this category. Now, you might notice that this one has a Rotor Riot battery strap on it, and the reason for that is that this one comes pre-built from Rotor Riot. Andy Shen sells the frames, but Rotor Riot is building this and selling it as a kit from their store. Next up, the Holybro Kopis Cinewhoop. This is the iFlight Bumblebee, and if you know a little bit about Cinewhoops, you may know that iFlight already released the iFlight Megabee, a Cinewhoop on a similar platform. They say that the Bumblebee is everything that was good about the Megabee, and they improved even better from there. Finally, we've got the Diatone Taycan. Now, as you might guess from the fact that there are 4 quadcopters in this roundup, this is going to be a multi-part review. We're not going to try and we can't possibly say everything there is to say about these quadcopters in just one video. And in this video, what I want to do is I just want to look at the characteristics, the specs, the way they go together, and see how these guys stack up against each other. Then, in the next video, I'm going to actually fly them. And we'll see, obviously, flight matters too. But let's spend some time just looking at the decisions that the designers have made and how they put these guys together. So the first thing that stands out about a Cinewhoop is probably the thing that makes it a whoop. Like, what even is the similarity between this 3-inch-ish quadcopter and a 65mm tiny whoop? The similarity is the prop guards, or the ducts. And I say prop guards or ducts because a prop guard and a duct are not exactly the same thing. Anything that goes around a prop and prevents the prop from striking an object is a prop guard. And prop guards are very important on Cinewhoops because Cinewhoops are designed to be flown in close proximity to actors and people who don't necessarily want to get their face chopped off by props. So it's very important that they're safe. So the prop guards protect the props, but they're more than that. Because on the original Shendrones Squirt, you can see that the prop guard is flared, and it's specifically designed to come in very close proximity to the prop. And that makes it a duct, not just a prop guard. And ducts matter because ducts improve the efficiency and improve the thrust of a prop. That's just a fact. Andy Shen has said that he gets something like an extra 240 grams, 200-ish grams of thrust from the motor. I think he said that was something like 15% more thrust. And the duct does that by directing the air downwards instead of letting it kind of blow out. The more downwards air you get, the more thrust you get. Conservation of momentum, obviously. I mean, I think we all know that, right? So here are the ducts on the Shendrones Squirt, and Andy Shen has put a lot of work into designing the ducts to have the correct aerodynamic characteristics to produce that extra 15%, 200-ish grams of thrust. But if we compare that to the ducts on the Diatone Taycan, you can see that they have kind of a curved shape, but they don't have the same kind of exactly flared shape that produces the improvement in efficiency that you want from ducts. In addition, if you look at the distance of the prop from the duct, there's a little bit of space there, whereas on the Shendrones Squirt, the prop is very, very close to the duct. And in fact, some of the original pilots, you didn't used to be able to get props in this exact size. People used to take 4-inch props and cut them down. And what some pilots would do is they would actually cut their props slightly large and then literally just spin. When Paul Nurkala did this, I was like, are you sure? Is that really how it's done? They would just spin the prop and let it kind of gouge away the prop guard. So there was just enough clearance, because the less clearance there is, the tighter the prop is to the duct, the more efficiency you gain. So the Diatone has what might more appropriately be called prop guards, and the same thing is true for the Bumblebee. And the Bumblebee actually has completely cylindrical, completely straight walls, whereas the Diatone has a little bit of a bulge here. Debatable what effect that might, I really couldn't say. You would need like a wind tunnel or a thrust stand to test that. And the Holybro does have a bit of a flare at top and does kind of look similar to the Shendrones Squirt. And the props do come pretty close to the edge, although not really touching. The construction of the prop guards on these quads is something that you definitely need to put a lot of thought into when you're deciding which one you want. The Shendrones Squirt prop guards sold by Rotor Riot are made of TPU, and TPU is a very flexible material. As a result of that, well, number one, when you first install it, it may not fit perfectly and the prop may rub. And again, the solution to that is just spin the props until it digs it away and then you're fine. Yes, that's really what a professional told me. But after you crash, it's also going to kind of move and shuffle around. And so you're going to get into situations where that's going to keep happening until eventually maybe you'll even cut through and you'll have to go through and replace this. Also, because these are flexible, they are not as good at protecting the prop from, you're not going to cut a person if you hit them, but if you hit a wall, it's obviously going to gouge in and kind of bend the prop potentially or damage the prop. The prop guards on the Holybro, there's no way they're TPU. They're too rigid for that. I would guess that they're PLA or maybe some other kind of rigid plastic, but given the expense and difficulty of printing things like ABS or nylon, my guess is that they're PLA. I haven't been able to confirm that with Holybro because it's Chinese New Year and they're all on vacation. But it's a much more rigid plastic. It's going to have a little bit less give, although obviously still some give. But the iFlight and the Diatone have done something really, really freaking clever, because they have another rigid plastic here. Again, my guess is it's PLA, but they have covered it with foam. And this is really freaking smart, because that foam is going to take the impacts. It's going to prevent the plastic from taking a hit, and it's going to really improve the durability. And I've heard this from people who are flying these in the field, that it just really improves the overall durability compared to the designs of the Squirt and the Holybro. But iFlight and Diatone have gone even further than that, because they have reinforced the ducts with this carbon ring around the top. And that is both on the top and the bottom. And that, additionally, that means that when you slam into a wall, not only is the foam going to reduce the impact, but then in addition, this carbon is going to take the impact edge on. And that really, really limits the ability of the plastic to kind of deflect inwards. It means your props are going to last a lot longer. That's the idea anyway. It seems like this is a much more refined design on both the Bumblebee and the Diatone. So if we look at the Shendrones Squirt and the Holybro Kopis, we see that the ducts are not really attached to the frame as securely as they are on the other two. In the case of the Squirt, the duct is a single piece of plastic printed, and there is a standoff going through here and standoffs going through here, but there's nothing on top. And the frame as a whole is just a flat carbon fiber plate, and so there's quite a lot of potential for flex in the prop guards and in the frame. By comparison, the Holybro's ducts are printed separately and they actually clip together. So if you did damage one, you could replace it separately. But it's a similar design in that they both connect to the bottom flat plate, and there's quite a lot of potential for flex in there. These top protective rings that have been added by the iFlight and the Diatone add a lot of stiffness, because it means that the entire frame is sandwiched, not just the main body of the frame. And there's just a lot more stiffness. You can twist it, obviously, but there's just a ton more stiffness throughout the entire width of the frame compared to the other two. But iFlight and Diatone have not made the exact same design decision, because the iFlight frame is a single piece of carbon all the way across the top, and a single piece of carbon all the way across the bottom. By comparison, the Diatone frame has a traditional sort of main body, and then the ducts actually screw on right here and here. So you actually could change out this one piece if you needed to, if it broke. Does that affect the rigidity? I don't really know. It's hard to tell. But it does mean that the Diatone is just a little bit more repairable, but then since it's not one piece of carbon, maybe potentially a little bit less strong than the iFlight. Now, you've surely noticed by now that the iFlight Bumblebee and the Diatone Taycan both have a standard analog FPV camera and standard analog video transmitters in them. By comparison, the Holybro Kopis has the DJI system in it, and of course, the Shendrones Squirt was sent from Rotor Riot, and Rotor Riot loves DJI, so of course it also has a DJI Air unit in it. The iFlight and the Diatone both can be ordered with the DJI HD unit. They just didn't choose to send those, probably because it's expensive. That does raise the question, though. Do you need HD on a Cinewhoop? Because here's the thing. One of the advantages of going with something like DJI HD is you can choose not to carry a GoPro, and you can still get pretty good results out of the DJI Air unit. But it's always assumed that a Cinewhoop is going to be carrying a GoPro. No director of photography is going to accept your analog feed or even your DJI feed as acceptable results. And so some people have argued that the extra weight of the DJI Air unit is wasted since you're always going to be using your GoPro as your final result. But I don't think that argument holds water, and Paul Nurkala, the professional Cinewhoop guy, has also said that he feels like DJI HD is an advantage. Number one, just because you can see more, you can see better, and especially in tight indoor environments, the ability to see better does make a difference in your ability to negotiate the obstacles. But Paul also recently put out a video where he showed the enormous difference that the DJI system makes when dealing with a high multipath environment. High multipath environment just crushes analog. Even a really good analog receiver like Rapid Fire can struggle, but the DJI system being digital just doesn't freaking care, and you get great results. And Paul has said that that's like the final nail in the coffin for analog when it comes to Cinewhoop. So if you want to put analog in your Cinewhoop, go for it. But don't make the argument that just because the Cinewhoop is assumed to be carrying a GoPro, there's no point to digital. Digital does make a difference. Next, I want to look at the way that these frames mount the FPV camera. And the Shendrones Squirt, it mounts the camera way out in front. There's this TPU, this U-shaped piece of TPU, and it's cut out. And at first, like as a freestyle pilot, I'm like, oh, that's going to break. But you got to remember that Cinewhoops aren't intended for hardcore freestyle rippage. They're intended for slow, smooth, cinematic flight. But for perspective, the GoPro mounts for these guys pretty much all come at about 10 or 15 degrees of up tilt. You don't want to be moving quickly. You want to be moving slowly and smoothly, so then you reel steady the shot and it looks all amazing and cinematic. So probably that's okay. I mean, the fact that Andy Shen did it, and I believe Paul Nurkala also flies the Shendrones Squirt, so it's probably okay. But let's look at the way that some of these other guys have done it. Here is the Holybro Kopis, and it has a similar design. This is just a little bit more rigid, I think, and offers just a little bit more protection than the kind of floppy TPU on the Squirt. One thing that really drove me crazy about this choice in the Kopis is that these protective pieces here completely cover the front standoffs. And when I went to mount the GoPro mount, I could not get these screws out because whichever screw I turned, the standoff just turned inside it. And there was no way for me to get in here and grip the standoff like with a pair of pliers without just taking the whole freaking thing apart. Drove me crazy. Just a little annoyance to point out. Now the iFlight Bumblebee goes a more traditional direction, simply putting the camera between two standoffs. That's probably fine, because at the end of the day, you got the ducts to protect the camera anyway. And in this case, it still is going to keep the ducts out of view. So maybe that's even better. Maybe that's even better protected in some ways than the other two. And finally, we've got the Diatone Taycan. And the Taycan has a metal guard. And I don't think there's any question that this is the best protected of the three cameras. Moving to the back of the quad, I really love this 3D printed piece on the back of the Diatone Taycan. It's an all-in-one. You can see that it's got a cutout here for a Crossfire antenna if you choose to go with a Crossfire Immortal T. It's got here for the just standard 2.4 gigahertz antennas if you want to go with antenna tubes or zip ties. And it's got a mount for the VTX antenna. But I hate the bulkhead mounts for VTX antennas. Let me show you what I mean. I hate this style of mount. Now this here is the iFlight Bumblebee, but lots of other quads do this, and I hate it every time I see it. Number one, this nut is always loose from the factory. They just kind of hand thread it on and they don't tighten it down. So the very first thing you need to do is you need to go in and tighten it down. So then you get your wrench and you go to tighten it down, but watch out, because as you turn, you're going to twist off. You're going to twist the whole thing. You're not just... So now you got to go get another wrench to hold the other side steady, and you got to tighten this down. And by the time you tighten it down enough that it's not slipping, then it's so tight that it's practically crushing and going through the TPU, and then you get in a crash and it rips it out, and I just absolutely despise this type of mount. I wish people would stop doing it. It seems like a good idea, but it just does not hold up in real life, at least not in my experience. But the way that Diatone has done it is really smart. They're using the style of pigtail. Do I have one? Yeah, I do. I have one right here. They're using this style of pigtail with the two screw holes. And that means that they can literally screw into the pigtail itself. And that means that it is not going anywhere. It's nice. It's strong. But because this is a TPU mount, it does have enough flex that it's probably not going to just break your antenna off in a crash. Really good job there, Diatone. Now here's something that both the Diatone and the iFlight were guilty of. When I went to install the GoPro mount, I took the screws out of the standoffs, I put the GoPro mount on, and I went to put the screws back in, and the screws were too short. The screws are just long enough to go through the top plate, but they're not long enough to go through the GoPro mount, because nobody's going to mount a GoPro on these guys. Nobody's going to mount a GoPro on these, are they? No. So I had to get my own M2 screws and install them. Guys, make these screws like 3 millimeters longer, and then they'll be long enough to go through the GoPro, and it won't lose anything the rest of the time. Silly. I'd like to use the Holybro Kopis to illustrate one of the most annoying things about Cinewhoops, and that is that because of the ducts, you oftentimes can't easily get at the SD card or at the USB port. So take a look at the SD card slot here on the DJI unit and think about what you'd have to do to get that in and out. You could like poke it with something. It's just going to be freaking annoying. And where's the USB port for the... Oh yeah. So the USB port for the flight controller is right here. And I've actually done some... I've actually gotten one of these magnetic USB connectors, and I plugged it in so that you can just kind of magnetically kind of get it in there from the top, and it just sucks itself up and sticks itself on. Oh, there we go. See? Easy peasy. That way you don't have to like risk damaging the USB port to do it, and you can just, see, look, it just boop, comes right off. Link to that down in the video description along with all the rest of this junk. There's another solution. The iFlight ships with this solution, which is a right angle USB adapter, and you can get those. Those are just a couple bucks, and everybody I know who uses Cinewhoops keeps them around or even leaves them permanently installed in their quad if they so desire. That's certainly a good solution. But the Shendrones actually has a really novel solution for this. They've actually mounted the air unit sideways. Here, you can see it best from the back. They've mounted it sideways, and one of the things that does is it means that the deck is higher. It means it's a little bit taller, and you might think, well, that's dumb. Why did they do that? But the reason they did that is because you can get at the SD card slot for the air unit here, and you can get at the USB port for the air unit here to do all those DJI firmware updates that you're always having to do. The flight controller, okay. Flight controller is still a pain to get at. Where's the USB port? I can't even see the freaking thing. The flight controller is still a pain to get at, but it's some of a solution, if not a perfect one. Now, speaking of maintainability, this is a case where the iFlight, I think, is the worst of the four. If you need to get into the iFlight in order to, change a flight controller, change an ESC, or whatever else you might need to do, you've got to take the whole top plate off. And we talked earlier about how that might add some rigidity or might add some strength, having it be just one. But if you compare that to like the Diatone, you just remove these screws and the top plate lifts off. Same deal for the Shendrones Squirt. Top plate just lifts off. And same deal for the Holybro. In fact, the Holybro is only 4 screws, and the top plate will lift off and let you get in there for maintenance. The next thing we need to do is talk about the gear that the manufacturers have put into these quads. And in order to do that, I've made this handy dandy spreadsheet, and there's a link to the spreadsheet down in the video description if you want to check it out for yourself. In a lot of ways, these guys are similar, but there are a couple ways that a few of them stand out. The Diatone is spec'd with 1408 motors, and 1407, 1408 motors have been the choice for this class of quadcopter pretty much since the beginning. So there's no question that they're adequate. But recently, people seem to be moving to 1507-ish motors, and that's what all of the others ship with, 1507 motors. The Shendrones Squirt from Rotor Riot and the Holybro both ship with T-motor 1507 motors, very high quality motors. And the iFlight naturally ships with Zing motors, that's iFlight's house brand, and they're also very high quality motors. One of the things that Cinewhoop pilots have to get used to is that it is heavier and less powerful compared to like a 5-inch freestyle quad. But if you do want more power, those 1507 motors are going to be able to deliver it in a way that the 1408 motors on the Diatone aren't going to be able to deliver. And if you're worried about flight times being too short because of those giant motors, just put a throttle cap on and scale it back down and you'll probably be fine. So I think that the Diatone is a little bit in a disadvantage here for having the smaller motors. Another thing that differentiates between these quads is that all of them come with an F4 based flight controller, except the Holybro, which comes with the Kakute F7 HDV. That F7 flight controller is going to give you more processor cycles for doing things like RPM filtering, bidirectional D-shot, and whatever the heck the Betaflight devs come up with in the future. F4 is capable of doing everything we need today, and practically speaking, many people probably won't notice much of a difference in flight performance. But frankly, just the hassle of having to deal with UART inversion and all that BS when I'm trying to hook up my receiver, that alone might be enough to make me steer a little bit towards an F7. I would much rather see the price of these quadcopters go up by $20 or $30 even, if that's what it took, and get an F7 in there. And I'm kind of surprised, especially that iFlight, who has plenty of F7 flight controllers in their stable, that they didn't choose to do that. As far as ESCs go, these guys all have between a 35 amp to a 60 amp ESC, and it doesn't freaking matter because these little motors and props are never going to draw anywhere remotely near that much. So ESCs, it's as good as a wash. Props, we'll talk about props when we see how they actually fly, but the real, I mean, you could always change props, and you're going to ruin the first set of props you get anyway. So like the fact that the iFlight comes with these kind of bullnose style props, and I look at that and I go, yeah, really? Is that best? I don't know. But if you didn't like it, you could just change to something else anyway. Who cares? Finally, let's compare these guys based on their weight. And of course, a heavier one, but that makes more thrust because of the props of the motor, it might all balance out. But let's at least take a look at the weight. The Holybro with its GoPro mount, 290 grams. The Shendrones Squirt from Rotor Riot, 323 grams. The iFlight Bumblebee, 290 grams. And the Diatone Taycan, 315 grams. So pretty close in weight, although a 30 gram difference for a quadcopter this size. I mean, that's like a 50 or 60 gram difference for a 5-inch quadcopter, proportional to the total weight of the quad. So that's going to bring us to the end of part 1 of our Cinewhoop Roundup, where we look at the build and the specs on each one. The next part is going to be, obviously, we fly them, and we see how they stack up in that way. So look for that coming out in the channel. In fact, there's going to be a playlist down in the video description, which has all the parts in it. The other thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be releasing a setup video for each of these, showing how I set it up and showing my configuration and so forth. And if you've bought one of these, then hopefully that'll help you get it set up and flying. But that's going to do it for this one. If you want to check out the spreadsheet that I showed you, it's linked down in the video description. And of course, there are links to all of these products down in the video description if you've already decided which one you want, just based on this video, good for you. Look for more content, though, coming up on my channel in this Cinewhoop week. It's like Shark Week, but with Cinewhoops, right? It's the same thing. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your comments. Let me know what you'd like to see in future videos in this series. You have like one day to do it because the next video is coming out tomorrow, but go ahead, let me know what you think, and I definitely will take it into account if I can. Happy flying, everybody.